All right, so we are doing the afternoon update down here. It's day 3 of the retrial of the 4 men inside: Eric Parker, Stephen Stewart, Scott Drexler, and Ricky Loveland. Today's been a really great day because it started raining, and I believe it was 70 degrees when we got here. So that is huge for us. Of course, we don't have all of our flags and signs out because we don't want them getting wet. If it dries out a little bit later, we will do that. So let's see. Let's talk about this weekend. We did the stand event. That was huge. It's on InfoWars. It's the main story. Please go there, read it, see the video, share it. Thank Roger Stone for coming out here and speaking up for us, because what we're seeing inside, the only way these guys are going to get out is with a presidential pardon or a dismissal of the case, because what we're seeing inside is that there's a possible another hung jury, but we're not allowed to enter our evidence, and we're really constricted to what we can even talk about. So that's an issue. What is very important is that we keep getting this information out to people. So please go to InfoWars, share the story, go to Roger Stone's Facebook page, thank him for coming to Nevada and standing up for the political prisoners. Yesterday at court, they showed Ricky Loveland's booking photo. They cut it up and just showed one of his tattoo. This is because last trial, they brought in an FBI agent to identify Ricky Loveland, and he pointed out a lawyer. So they're introducing their booking photos. This is detrimental because in the photo, you can see that he is chained. He's in the orange jumpsuit. It pretty much gives you the idea that he's already guilty. So then the lawyers went to Eric and Scott, and they said, you know, they're going to come after your guys' tattoos as well. So in protest, they both rolled up their sleeves and showed the jury their tattoos yesterday in court. It was really great to talk to Eric last night. He was very positive, even with everything that was going on. You know, he said, if they're going to do this, if they're going to prevent us, then we'll just have to start protesting in the courtroom. And that's what they've begun to do. So we started out the day today with the judge telling the defendants that they are not able to speak or mouth things at the jury during sidebar. And they're not to write things on a legal pad and show them to the jury. Apparently, Stephen Stewart mouthed something or said something, and the jury could possibly hear him during one of the sidebars yesterday. It could have been something like, I'm not sure. I do not believe that anyone wrote anything on a legal pad and showed it. The prosecution wanted to know exactly what was said, and they said, well, you can talk to the defense about that. I believe that there was nothing shown. So we go in and we're still in cross-examination with Special Agent Saylor. They're bringing up, we're still with Perez. Perez brings up a post from J.D. Parks. It's a private message to Ricky Loveland, but Ricky doesn't respond to this message. So here he proves to the jury that, you know, what people send you is you don't have any control over that. All you have control over is what you reply or send out. So if it's a message that was sent to you and you never even replied, how do you know he even saw it? Then he brought up the picture of Ricky and Todd, the one where they say he has his hand on the gun. And in the picture, they blow it up, and you can see the barrel underneath Todd. The butt of the gun is at Ricky's side. His hand is down near it, and the barrel of the gun is below Todd. So you can see that it is not pointed anywhere, and you can see that it is not in his hand. And the agent had to say, yes, his hand is near the gun, not on the gun. It also came out that they started the investigation on Bundy Ranch starting on April 7th with Ryan Payne, but they were looking into Jerry Burkhart and Ryan Payne since 2013. So they didn't start looking into Ricky until April 7th, but Ryan Payne and Jerry Burkhart, they already had on their radar since 2013. Then they brought up Carol Bundy's post, and they highlighted the part saying she wanted it to remain peaceful. The family wanted it to remain peaceful. They brought that up again. Let's see. There was a post from Randy Eaton. An objection to this. this was, he said, what we are seeing is several media sources were talking about rising tensions, arresting the protesters, and a military-style standoff. He shows a bunch of different posts. What people are saying in these posts. We may not be able to talk about this, but if they bring in a post that talks about rising tempers in Nevada, arresting the protesters, and military-style standoff, we can then bring that in. So the lawyer goes through all these different posts and he brings all these words in, and he's just trying to show the jury that there is something that they're not showing you here. Then they bring up, and this is Marchese, he brings up that Saylor was one of the agents who helped arrest Eric Parker. There was an objection to this because it wasn't in direct examination. So he says, okay, well, if it's not in direct examination, then I would like to recall Saylor for the defense. What they're trying to get in here is the interview that Eric did with Saylor in the transport. Now, when Eric Parker was arrested, he was arrested in Ketchum, Idaho. He was not taken to our local office. He was immediately put in a vehicle and interviewed as he drove the 2.5 hours to Boise, Idaho, and booked there. So he's trying to get that interview brought in. They would not let it during this. Another thing, a lady on the prosecution side is chewing gum and blowing bubbles. She's an FBI agent that sits behind the prosecution. I believe she's FBI. And then when we're doing sidebars today, the court's kind of trying to get around making sidebars a negative thing to the jury. So now they have a bowl of candy. And they're going to pass around a bowl of candy to all the jurors while sidebar is going on. Let's make it a positive thing. They all get, every time there's a sidebar, they're going to get a piece of candy. Are we children? Not to mention that the observers are harassed if they have a piece of gum, if they have a Tic Tac, a piece of gum, if we have anything in the courtroom, water bottles over 16 ounces, now they have a notice outside the courtroom. But yet, the FBI is allowed to chew gum and blow bubbles with their gum, and they're going to pass candy out to the jury to try to make it seem like sidebars are a good thing. Tanasi goes up, and he brings up the fact that none of the emails go to Stephen Stewart directly, and that there's numerous emails from MOA and Ricky Loveland, and none of them went to Stephen Stewart. Then we go into copy and post. Copy and paste. So they bring up one of the exhibits where somebody other than Ricky posts something, and then later in the thread, because it's between a bunch of different people, he says it's from someone else. And so he gets the FBI agent on the stand to say that you cannot, he admits that copy and paste is not able to be noted on the log. They can't tell if it's something you drafted yourself or you copy and pasted it. And that's creating a reasonable doubt for the jury, because here obviously something is copy and pasted. We've talked about copy and paste and repost many times in the trial today. And then it was brought up, how do you know the Facebook name is a real person? And the agent was kind of like, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, up there it says Billy the Kid. He said, how do you know Billy the Kid's really the Billy the Kid and who that person is? And then he asked, do you know Robin Kirkham? We all know from last trial, Robin Kirkham is an undercover FBI agent that went undercover on the Bundy Ranch page starting in January of 2014. This is before the ranch, before the cattle impound started. This is, once again, proof that there was a conspiracy against the Bundy family. Immediately there was an objection and it was sustained. Then there was no phone calls to Scott Drexler. They bring up the timeline that they put on there, and in that timeline they have that Cliven Bundy requests the sheriff disarm the BLM and knock those pay posts down. He brought up what you didn't put on there is Sheriff Gillespie got on the stage right before Cliven Bundy did, and this is not on their little outline, and he said that the BLM had ceased operations and that they were removing their assets and the public land was being reopened. That wasn't on their timeline, and he brought it back up for the jury. Then we go into the jury questions. So there was 1, 2, 3, for 5 jury questions today. A couple of them had multiple questions on the page. The first one was, whose testimony was read by Saylor? And they said, well, that was Eric Parker's testimony from a previous hearing. The second question was a 2-part. What is MOA? And they said, well, that's the group Ryan Payne started. And what is their mission? This is a great question. They had to bring up the statement. It was entered into evidence, but it was never read fully. So they read the mission statement, and it's got a who, what, where, when, and why. And all of it is, it even says they're going to work with local law enforcement when applicable. They state that they will go by laws as long as the laws do not interfere with the state constitution and the union constitution. So here, I think it was a really good thing to have read. Obviously, the prosecution didn't like it because they went back and narrowed things out of it and read just one line again. But I think the jury is getting keen to what's going on here. The next question, phone calls. How can you tell who made the call? And the agent went to say that he could tell who made the call based on the phone traveling and where the cell phone towers are coming from. This was argued back and forth by many people. I know that the prosecution got back up and then the defense got back up. They said, well, you can't really tell unless you have a picture of the person using the phone. I believe Perez got back up and he said, at 12:13 there was a phone call made by Ricky Loveland, and we can prove this because we have a picture of Ricky Loveland making that phone call. It goes to his sister Cheyenne Miller, and that's proof. But there's not proof. Perez said, for instance, someone made a phone call off of my phone last night at 9:15. Can you tell me who that person was? They can't do it. So they had to admit that, yes, unless you have an actual picture, you can't tell who actually made that call. Then the judge intervened and she said, well, here's where we go to circumstantial evidence, is not what she said, and direct evidence. So circumstantial evidence is a person walks in the courtroom and they've got an umbrella and they've got a raincoat. You can deduce that it's raining outside. Direct evidence is that you see that it's raining outside, and that the jury will have to go take that to the weight that they give that testimony. Yeah, the jury has to put the weight to that. The next part of the question, how can you assure a cut and paste post has been edited? They said that they could not. Then the third part, when reviewing the Facebook address for the names, can you identify their aliases? So here we go into this question again about Billy the Kid. And once again, he said, after going back and forth between the prosecution and the defense multiple times on this question, he finally admitted that the only people they looked into, the many people on this thread, were the people that they were investigating. They didn't try to find out who Billy the Kid was. They didn't try to find out if Robin Kirkham was on that thread. We all know that the FBI informants, they go in, they say things, they make these comments, so that they can get people to incriminate themselves, or even their comments are being used inside this fake court in here as evidence against the defendants. You don't have to be the one posting the comment. It just has to be coming to you for it to be evidence against you in the courtroom. My favorite question from the jury today so far: why would you come armed when you are just crowd control and to round up cattle if you did not intend to use them? Here we're seeing that the jury understands. They're saying, well, what was the point in the BLM being armed if they're just there for crowd control and they're there for cattle? Why did the sheriff bring SWAT team if he's just there for crowd control? I mean, I guess you would bring SWAT team for crowd control, but some people they're realizing there's something not quite right there. They decided that wasn't a question that this agent could answer, so they asked it, but they didn't answer it. And then the last question: were any of the other defendants communicated directly by Mr. Payne? Now, this is where having an FBI agent on the stand works for the prosecution. These guys have gone through extensive training on how to manipulate words. They have gone through extensive training on how to avoid answering certain questions or getting you to answer a question in a certain way, ask their questions in a certain way. So he says, well, Mr. Payne did many interviews with media, and he was quoted in those interviews, and Parker and Stewart read those articles. Is that an answer to that question? No, the answer to that question is no. So they ended up having to go back and reiterate that to the jury later on with one of the lawyers. The prosecution came back and asked if copy and paste was done automatically or if the person themselves had to copy it and paste it. So they said yes, the person themselves had to copy and paste it. The prosecution, like I said, goes through the mission statement, pulls out certain lines, states that laws that goes against the state and union constitution are unjust laws. You know, they're really trying to pick this apart. It didn't work out well. Jess gets up there and he tries to enter a different part of Eric Parker's testimony to answer the jury's question. That was, the judge says that's unadmissible evidence, and unadmissible evidence does not become admissible just because the jury asks a question. So they're feeling the pressure here because they're allowing the jury to ask questions, and some of those questions they're not going to like. And let's see, Drexler goes back to the mission statement, and he goes back through it, says, you know, where it states they'll work with law enforcement, things like that. They didn't look at everyone on the page, and that's about it for the day. We are out at lunch here. The end of day report is going to be somewhat short. We have some other things that we've got to get right on to. So, like I said, we're really appreciate if you can share this, get the information out, talk to your friends and neighbors. You know, just posting something on Facebook's not going to work. Bring up this information in your groups, in your book study groups, when you're out grocery shopping. Talk to the people around you. Educating people, knowledge is power, and that's the only way we're going to get things to turn around. Have a good day.